Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Deborah O'Gara, and I'm the Senior Policy Specialist for the Alaska Native Women's Resource Center, and today is our annual consultation webinar. This webinar is going to help us to understand what the Consultation for Violence Against Women Act is, and we'll have a lot of information for you. Before we get started, I actually want to call on Candy to provide us with any technical information. Candy?
Good morning, everyone. This is Candy Cowan. I'm the Communications Coordinator for AK and WRC. And I just want to thank you guys for joining our webinar today. Before we get started, we'll go over a couple of the housekeeping items that are important for you guys to be aware of. So if you look at the right side of your screen, you'll see the Go to Webinar Control Panel. And within that control panel, there are a couple sections that are going to be most important to you guys. I'm going to bring your attention to them now. The first one that you want to be aware of is your audio section. So if at any point in the webinar you're experiencing bad audio, what you want to do is go to that section and go ahead and select the phone option for several seconds and then click back to the computer option. This will force your computer to create a new connection for you for the audio. And then at that point, if you're still having issues, then go ahead and call in to the phone option by dialing the number that is provided in that section. The next section is the handout section. We have a number of great resources in there, including the framing papers, some save the dates, the slides for this webinar in that section. So be sure to get in there and download those if you want access to those. And then the last is the question section, and that's where you're going to be able to provide us with any questions that you have throughout the webinar, and we'll either answer them as we go or at the end. And if there is no time for that, then for sure we'll follow up with you through email afterwards. And today's webinar is being recorded, and we will share it on our website later on as it becomes available to us in recording. And other than that, I just want to, again, thank you all for participating, and please feel free to follow us on Facebook, and our website is www.aknwrc.org, and you can sign up for our mailing list through our website. Again, thank you all. Deborah?
Okay, thank you. So I already introduced myself. I'm going to ask Paula and Mike to introduce themselves briefly, and then we'll get started. You're on mute, Paula.
Yeah, thank you, Deborah. And good morning to everyone in Alaska. Thank you to Mike, Chief Williams from the Akiak Native community for joining us today for today's webinar and sharing his wisdom around the importance of government-to-government consultation. I am a Senior Policy Specialist with the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, and we work very closely in partnership and sisterhood and brotherhood with the Alaska Native Women's Resource Center. So I will turn this over to Mike.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be on this important panel in preparation for the annual government-to-government consultation on this important subject. I've been on these consultation issues for a long time, for about 20 years now, I think 15, 20 years. It's been quite a while, and it's been a long journey for our Alaska tribes in getting here, and our involvement made a huge difference to our communities. And before I go any further, my condolences to Tammy's family with her loss of her precious mother. And I know it's very hard to lose a parent. and I know I've lost both of my parents, but our deepest condolences to Tammy Drew and the family there. Our hearts go, our prayers and hearts go to them. But I look forward in hearing these issues and the process. I know that COVID-19 has put a lot of us in a bad place, and but I think with the technology and other ways continues to bring us together and getting the job done, and hopefully that this government to government consultation will we'll be well prepared for our programs and issues from Alaska. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thanks, Paula. And I've already introduced myself briefly, so we'll jump right into it. Today is about giving you all the information that you will be wanting and needing for the upcoming VAWA Violence Against Women Act consultation. We're here to for a couple of things, to talk to you about the consultation and what to expect, also to help prepare the Alaska tribes, those of you who are on, as well as anybody else who is able to view the this webinar after we've got it posted online. We want to be available to help you with both oral and written testimony at the consultation. And this year, like many things throughout 2020, this year's annual consultation is going to be done virtually, and it will be done October 27th to the 30th. It'll be a half day starting Alaska time at 9 a.m. and go until 1 p.m. So you won't have to sit on the computer for the entire day, but just in the morning hours over those 4 days. The purpose of the consultation is to do government to government communication about this important act. And we're hoping that as many tribes as possible will send tribal leaders or a tribal designee to provide testimony orally. There's also going to be room, we believe, to have caucus rooms, and we'll have other information throughout this slide. And also I want to let folks know, also I see in the chat right now, periodically throughout this presentation, we'll be putting websites and links in the chat. So I encourage you to copy those down or save the chat so that you can refer back to them. There's also some handouts that are posted, and those are available for you to download right now while you're watching the webinar. Next slide, please.
Deborah, if I could just add, if you haven't already registered, please register to provide both testimony, but also to listen to all of the leaders and their designated representatives. I think that the groundswell of tribal participation and tribal engagement with the federal government through these annual consultations has really made a difference. So if you can please register to show the government that this is an important issue for us. You don't need to provide testimony. You can register just to observe, but definitely if you are a tribal leader or authorized representative, please provide oral testimony.
And Paula, folks need to register just to be able to listen. Is that correct? Yes,
just so that they know capacity-wise how many to expect on the during the sessions.
So that's the importance of getting registered, even if you just plan on listening on the days either that you're not testifying, or if you're not somebody who's actually going to be testifying if you want to just listen into what other tribes are testifying about. So, and that link is in the chat. Okay. The tribe, as many of you know, tribes and the federal government have a very special relationship. It's a government to government relationship. It's one that we share through ever since the United States was first formed. The VAWA Consultation mandate became a law with the reauthorization of the VAWA Act in 2000, in the year 2000. And it was because of advocates and tribal spokespeople who understood the value of dialogue and discussion, and not just us telling the federal government what we thought they should do, but knowing that they were actually listening and taking our advice and our comments and our suggestions. That communication, which is now readily known as consultation, has been a hard fought, over the years, hard fought communication that we are continuing to strengthen throughout not just the Department of Justice, but through all federal agencies. And through the consultation, our tribal and federal government relations are strengthened, as well as our individual tribal sovereignty. And through that, the strength of women in our communities is in the safety of our women in all of our communities is increased. The access to federal administration of all tribal funds and programs under VAWA is something that we have that again has come from the previous consultations. So we are, the first consultation was in 2001, and each year we continue to ask for more, and we continue to ask for more, and as many of us know, the federal government works at a glacier pace, and but at least there's usually movement forward. So the fact that we have consultation is because advocates, many of whom are on this phone call and many of whom participate in the consultations every year, we have for the fact that we have a mandated consultation process. Next slide, please. Over to you, Paula.
Okay, thank you.
We're getting
I'm
some
getting
feedback.
some feedback.
Do we need to turn off some?
Mike, you might have to mute yourself if you're not gonna speak. I don't know, or I don't know, Candy, if you know where the feedback's coming from.
No, the only two mics on right now are you and Deborah.
Okay. All right, so and just to clarify, because I think that was an error on my part, the consultation started in 2006 was the first one. So my apologies on that end, Deborah. I think on the talking points I said 2000. So we're in our 15th. This is the 15th annual consultation, and on the slide in front of you is what tribal leaders and advocates wrote into VAWA Title IX, which is the Safety for Native Women title of the Violence Against Women Act. And this language, the 3 bullet points you see here, is what tribes wrote in as far as the purpose behind the government to government consultation. So the first purpose is for the Attorney General of the United States to solicit recommendations from Indian tribes on administering DOJ's administration of the tribal funds and programs in regards to violence against women. The second purpose is to hear from tribes about how the federal government can enhance the safety of Native women from domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking. And then in 2013, tribes amended Title IX to include sex trafficking. And then the third purpose is to for the Attorney General to solicit recommendations from Indian tribes about how to strengthen the federal response to these crimes. And I think, you know, tribal testimony can and should address what barriers tribes and Native women face, and some concrete recommendations for how tribal responses and federal responses can be strengthened in regards to these crimes. You will find the various grant programs that the Office on Violence Against Women administers we can put the website in the chat box, but that's available on the OVW website. I can't keep count anymore how many funds, how many programs there are available for Indian tribes to apply under. But that has grown because of tribes saying that they need those resources, and tribes deserve them as the states also receive such money. So next slide, please. And for some reason, yeah, Candy, you might have to, oh, thank you. I think you put the grant programs on there. Thank you. Deborah?
Great. So after many years, or after 7 years of the annual consultations, tribes once again requested and got another amendment to VAWA, and that was that reports be made to Congress by DOJ about what went on in the consultations. And not just that, and this slide actually details some of the requirements that DOJ has. Essentially, DOJ, after each annual consultation, must report to Congress what the tribes actually recommended, how the Attorney General is going to collaborate with the tribes and HHS and Department of Interior on what to do with those recommendations. And then, are we getting feedback again? Okay, so we'll, Paul, I think we'll just do one mic at a time to help keep that feedback down. So the second one was that requirement of the report is that the AG report how the AG's department or the Department of Justice is going to collaborate with the tribes and the federal agencies concerning those the tribes' recommendations, and then also report on any actions that have happened over the last year and any planned actions on what's going to happen with the tribal recommendations. So they're very concrete proposals or requirements for that report. And again, those annual reports are available on the OVW website. And as folks are preparing for this year's consultation, you are encouraged to go back and read some of the prior consultation reports, which are fairly lengthy, but they contain some really good information. This example of this change or this amendment to VAWA is really a testament of what can be accomplished during the consultations. Significant changes have been made, not just to the law, but also to the process of these annual consultations through the consultation process. So that's very important. Next slide, please.
It's also, Deborah, if I could just add, and I think you said this, but it really, this amendment in 2013 requiring this DOJ report to Congress came from tribal leaders and advocates saying there's no accountability. So, you know, year to year to year, we say this is what women and tribes need, and year to year to year, we don't see a change. We don't see a response. So this report to Congress serves a very real purpose in terms of kind of spelling out and documenting in writing what Native women and tribes are saying they need from the government. So for example, we know, so anyways, so just to stress the importance of those reports. Thank you, Deborah.
This next slide also shows another significant amendment that was made also in 2013, and that is that there is a requirement of notice of 120 days to all the tribes, and that's all the tribes in the United States, including all 229 tribes in Alaska, that this consultation is going to happen. And that again is very purposeful. It gives 120 days, which is a significant amount of time, much more than 30 or even 60, which is sometimes what the amount of notice that we used to get way back in the good old days. But 120 days so that tribes actually have an opportunity to prepare for the consultation, both prioritizing issues, collaborating with each other, and just getting a sense of what by the tribal leaders that will be testifying of what are the important issues that need to be communicated to the Department of Justice. Next slide, please. We're on the next slide. There we go. Okay. Now, as most of you know, and we've been talking a little bit about this, the significance of the tribal consultation to begin with. As many of you already know, and we're not going to spend a lot of time, the barriers facing Alaska Native women are huge, and of course are continuing to worsen, even without COVID that we're experiencing in 2020. Conditions for Alaska Native women were continually getting worse each year. That hasn't changed. I think, if anything, it's escalated a bit since COVID. But we can't blame our situation on just COVID. It was already bad to begin with. Because the Alaska tribes have been fully involved with government-to-government consultations since the very beginning for the last 15 years, there has been some improvements, as I mentioned earlier. They are sometimes small improvements, sometimes large improvements, and the one thing that's very consistent is that they are slow in coming. And so you'll see, for those of you who are some will geek out on the annual reports, you'll see that some of the same issues will come up year after year after year until then they don't come up because they've been resolved. It does take persistence and consistency. Our changing realities will also add new conditions and new demands or issues that we need to address, primarily focused on safeguarding our citizens and our Native women and children in our communities. Consultation can help to ensure that Alaska Native governments, tribal governments, can have a voice and be heard on the issues that affect us most in our own communities. And for those of you who have not previously been at a tribal consultation, you'll see right away that the heads of the federal agencies are at the table. So they're sitting there and they are dedicated to listening and sometimes responding and are available to talk. It's going to be a little unusual this year because for those of us who have been to these before, we're used to being able to walk up to them and actually have a face-to-face communication and talk with them about some of the issues that we're going to raise in our testimony. And we won't necessarily have that opportunity this time. And it just makes really it all that more important that we have both verbal, oral, and written testimony. The feds are there, the federal agencies and the heads of them who are the implementers of policy are there for those 4 days to hear from us. And at the all of the heads, as I said, of the federal agencies are going to be there, from the Department of Justice, Health and Human Services, Department of Health and Human Services, and the Department of Interior. Every once in a while, some other programs will come in, but those are the main ones that will be there. And it's proven over the years that we do have an impact. We have been able to remove some barriers, and we have been able to impact and change the law and some policies. And this process is set up to ensure that they actually listen to us. We can't always make them do what we think they should do, but we have set up a system and a process so they at least have to listen to us and then report about that, which is then in the written record. Next slide, please. Platform for change. We've got both. We're working with our national partners. The National Indian Women's Resource Center is one. National American Indian Congress is the other. The National Congress of American Indians is another group that organization that we work very closely with, as well as regional organizations. And we work with, we at Alaska Native Women's Resource Center continue and will continue to work with the tribal governments here in Alaska, specifically to develop a Alaska priority issues, and help build what issues are important to you. And they'll be very Alaska specific. And I think through our close work with our national partners on the Indigenous side, we have gained a lot and done a lot of education and collaboration with our partners, so that many of the issues that are important for us here in Alaska have been communicated and are then communicated by our national partners as well, NCAI and NIWRC, to name just a couple. So, and all that is in process. Our Alaska priorities is being developed now, and some of them will be going over in the next couple of slides. Next slide, please. So some of this I already went through. There's lots of resources available as you're preparing for your consultation. And these are just some of this slide here just lists some of them. We've already mentioned the annual consultation reports that are on the OVW website. I also want to draw attention to the NIWRC Restoration Magazine. If you don't already have a subscription to that, I encourage each of you to get that. And in the chat, or I actually think it's in the handouts, there is a link to the current issue of the Restoration Magazine that does outline the national policy issues that have been developed for Indian country nationally around the safety for women and Indigenous women and girls. So please look at that for also resources as you develop what your priorities are going to be. The other one is listed here is the NCAI national policies as well for 2020. Okay, next slide, please. And I'll turn it over to Paula.
Thank you, Deborah. And I just want to sort of reiterate what Deborah shared at the beginning of the webinar which is that the Alaska Native Women's Resource Center and the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center are available to help tribes develop their testimonies and their statements. So please feel free to email or call us, text us to have those discussions. So as far as the sort of, how else you can prepare, it's important to sort of review the changes that we've been able to make in the Violence Against Women Act with each reauthorization. So generally, any piece of federal legislation, as many of you know, that has money or appropriations attached to it, Congress has to reauthorize every 5 years generally. Sometimes they have longer periods, but for the most part, every 5 years, Congress has to reauthorize the legislation because of that funding. If there's other laws that are part of VAWA, like the Special Domestic Violence Criminal Jurisdiction, for example, or the recognition of full faith and credit for protection orders, those laws, because they're not attached to funding, those laws don't expire when the bills expire every 5 years. Those laws continue on the books as laws. But it's anything that's attached to funding, Congress has to sort of approve it again for ongoing appropriations. And there have been instances where even when they didn't reauthorize it, like the situation that we're in now with the Violence Against Women Act, which expired 2 years ago now. It expired in 2018, and Congress has continued to appropriate funding because they know how important the resources are for communities. But in sort of preparing for what your tribe wants to say, it's important to sort of think through what changes have been made in all of the reauthorizations. So VAWA first became law in 1994 and has been reauthorized 3 times since 1994. It was reauthorized in 2000, 2005, and 2013 was the last reauthorization of it. And with each reauthorization, tribes and Native women's advocates have further indigenized the Violence Against Women Act and strengthened it, including affirming or reaffirming tribal sovereignty, inherent tribal sovereignty, creation of the Special Domestic Violence Criminal Jurisdiction over non-Indians. Granted, it's limited to Indian country. So most of Alaska's tribes are excluded from that section of Title IX, that's Section 904. Section 905 in Title IX in 2013 reaffirmed that all tribes have full civil jurisdiction to issue and enforce protection orders. And then other changes like Tribal Coalitions program has been strengthened since it first became available in 2000. The funding has become formula versus discretionary, and the funding available to tribal coalitions has increased. And then sex trafficking and homicide were amended and included in Title IX. So where states are not allowed to use their funding to address sex trafficking, tribes are, because tribes said this is important and we need to be able to do this. So those have been some of the changes. So thinking through what your tribe's experiences are in responding to these abuses and crimes against your women, and what you need in order to protect them is important and helpful in thinking through your testimony. Deborah, next slide, please. I think the next slide has to do with sort of issues of concern, at least nationally, and what in a very united way, tribes are in agreement that these sort of rise to the surface in terms of not having disagreement about the importance of this for all tribes. So the first on the list was having tribal jurisdiction over non-Indian offenses. And unfortunately, Title IX has, Section 904 has the Indian country limitation. But that's something that I think we're working on with the reauthorization of VAWA and making sure that Alaska tribes, if they choose to exercise this limited criminal jurisdiction, can, with the creation of a pilot program. So that's how we've addressed that that issue in reauthorization. And then there are other issues which I'm not going to read through. I think as Deborah encouraged you all, you can look at the Restoration Magazine current edition from June because, and that's available online. I think the link is in the handouts section of the GoToWebinar control panel. And you can go to niwrc.org to find the current Restoration Magazine edition. But we have an article in there about these consultation priority issues. Some of them include missing and murdered as one of our priority issues that all tribes agree is an issue of concern that the federal government has to work with Indian tribes on. As well as the impact of the extractive industries and making sure that the Department of Interior continues to fund tribes, particularly in Alaska and California, for tribal court services, but also for tribal law enforcement and other tribal justice services. So those are just some of the issues that we have as issues that tribes have united on as issues of national concern. And I think before I turn this over to Deborah, thinking through sort of again what Alaska tribes specifically need, given the unique challenges that you have faced in the state of Alaska. So I'll turn this over to Deborah to talk about Alaska priority issues.
Okay, thanks, Paula. Next slide. So in addition to the national issues that that we have supported and actually been a part of developing, we also have identified over the years some specific Alaska priorities that are outlined in this slide. With each year, we re-examine these and either add to it, take off if it's been accomplished, and certainly add more. Certainly the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women is high on everybody's priority, both in Alaska and nationally. For here in Alaska, we are focusing in on the investigation aspect as well as the data collection. As many of you know, Alaska is reported to have the highest number of violence or level of violence against Indigenous women in the country. But we still really have no accurate data collection. So the numbers, as high as they might already be, we suspect are much higher. But again, data with that we really need in order to make our arguments. We also have an issue of law enforcement. I'll just add that really the law enforcement here is the lack of protocols and communication between law enforcement agencies. Then we have development of a local response that is aimed at increasing safety for our women and children, and accountability. And some of that goes to developing our tribal courts and having those be recognized as legitimate courts. And that's a long battle, but continues to be a priority issue. We also, of course, need increased funding and resources for a number of things that affect our families who are experiencing violence, and that includes safe housing, advocacy, victim services, and a good, viable, strong justice system that can, again, provide services for those who are experiencing violence, as well as holding those who commit violence accountable for their actions. And then the last thing that is carried over is organizing and informing ourselves and other statewide as well as federal agencies about the issue of trafficking in Alaska, which continues to escalate by all reports. If you ever talk with almost anybody here in the state, there is talk about the increased trafficking incidences that occur with not just our young women, but also young boys and children. So those are just some of those. As I said, we're offering these issues, both national and Alaska, as guides for your own particular tribal testimony. You certainly are welcome to address these in your oral or written testimony, or add to them if you have specific priority that is really rising above all of these for your community. So, and we're just offering these as a outline. And while we're switching over to the next slide, I want to give Mike a warning that I'm about ready to call on him. We're almost reaching to the end. We've got a couple more comments to finish, but I do want to give Mike an opportunity to address the participants as somebody who has participated in a number of consultations from as a tribal leader, and has seen some of those changes. And we must have lost him, Paula. Can you try to reach him?
I'm on the phone.
He's on the phone now. No wonder I can't see you. Okay, Mike. So
my internet connection is spotty, so I had to dial in.
Okay, so this is your time now to add to, before we close up and open the floor for any questions, to offer any words of wisdom and or just your own experience of participating in the consultation.
Well, I just, having been involved, since consultation started, and for 20 years, that I've been involved, and I got involved with this issue of when the Alaskan Daily News, Anchorage Daily News came out with People in Peril reports, and also the Alaska Native Commission's reports that, we have strong, tough issues going on in Alaska that involves alcohol, drugs, and ever since the development of North Slope oil and those economic booms that we've seen, and also seen from a lot of funding coming up in the villages and then disappearing as we speak right now. And I think these issues that just came out, the issue of Indian country, the only Indian country that we have is the Indian community of Metlakatla, and that's the only Indian country we have in Alaska via the Venati decision by the United States Supreme Court, and that has been a challenge of our 229 federally recognized tribes having no land to exercise our jurisdiction on, and that has been very challenging over the years. Our lands are being managed by our Alaska Native corporations as as of December 18, 1971. But other than but we've been working through the issues of we have jurisdiction over our members and et cetera, and it has been a long journey for us to address these issues of law enforcement and domestic violence, sexual assault, and homicide, and we've been dealing with those year after year, and just like you just stated, we have highest rates of domestic violence, sexual assault, and homicide, and missing and murdered women in Alaska. So I think these issues, when our Alaska tribes were exempted from VAWA, we were successful in making sure that we are not treated differently like our brothers and sisters from lower 48 concerning violence against women. And I think over the years that we've been allowing and working with the issue of Public Law 280, and that has been a very big challenge in Alaska and with California tribes and those other Public Law 280 states that put us in a tougher position to work with, for instance, the state of Alaska, and it has really put us in a challenging situation. But I think right now with 229 federal recognized tribes, I think each tribe has a unique opportunity to make sure that our women and children, the boys and our elders are protected in our communities, and that has been our advocacy, and those examples like Imangok women, without any resources, they started their safe house, and I think those examples that we have tribes, we heard stories about those women and children hiding in steam bathhouses or out in the woods when there are no, first responders responding to those activities. So we've seen a lot, and we need to continue to continue this consultation, and we need all of the Alaska tribes to put in their concerns, because one size does not fit all to each community. Just the community 11 miles from Akiak in Kwethluk or Akashuk or Tuluksak, they have different issues to work through, and I think those issues need to be worked on, and for future issues with continued oil development and hopefully the industries, extractive industries that come, and we know that what happened in North Dakota with the Balkan issues, we've seen that early when the North Slope oil start flowing, and we've seen that in Fairbanks and Anchorage, and the impacts that we've seen to our people that were affected. So I really appreciate the opportunity with the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center with Paula, and now that we have Alaska Native Women's Resource Center in Alaska. We've been lucky to have those to help each of the tribes if they need to hold workshops or to do something about domestic violence and sexual assault and others that lack of public safety, and have that resource available to address these issues. And I really appreciated the Alaska Native Women's Resource Center, the Indigenous Women's Resource Center, to come to ACIAC to hold these workshops, and we're lucky that our community was involved with that workshop. And we need to continue to support the technical assistance and help that we get at this level, because in Alaska, 229 tribes are scattered all over, and it's a huge state. And right now, with the lack of travel and these restrictions that we are experiencing, it's harder. Like right now, I don't even have. I had to sign off from the internet and just doing it with phone. And as much as I wanted to, do a webinar, I couldn't do it with my computer because it's a weak signal, and we need to improve that communication. So we got quite a few issues in Alaska that need to be addressed. And again, I would encourage all of the tribal leaders or their designee to get involved and register. I already registered for the consultation next month. So I'm going to be hooking up, and hopefully that consultation will allow me to have our issues be addressed by our people here in ACIAC Native community. So thank you very much for giving me a little time, and we need to work through these barriers, and we know that state of Alaska has not done a good job in recent times. They've cut the budget on VPSOs and etc. So they're not living up to the agreement that they had with what I mentioned earlier. So thank you very much for this time, and I'll conclude that for now.
Thank you very much, Mike. I'm so happy that you were able to join us and give us that message. That was really important. So I haven't seen any questions come in on the question or on the chat. So while I give everybody that's on this webinar a chance to gather their thoughts and come up with any questions that they might have, or have some announcements before we do closing remarks. I want to let folks know again, the consultation is scheduled for October 27th. It starts on that day. It runs for 4 days from 9 a.m. until 1 p.m. Please do register. The day before the consultation begins on October 26th, NIWR's National Indigenous Women's Resource Center and the National Congress of American Indians will be hosting a Tribal Leaders Caucus. And information about that is being mailed out. That will be, again, also virtual. Usually it's everybody in one room being able to talk. So trying to duplicate as much of it as we can. It'll be an opportunity to find out and talk with other tribal leaders about what their issues are and their testimony, as well as to ask for additional assistance as you prepare your testimony. We'll be at that Tribal Leaders Caucus. So I encourage you to mark that down on your calendar and plan on attending that. Also, there's a couple of other events that I want to make sure are on your calendar and on your radar. The Alaska Native Women's Resource Center will be having a unity meeting on October 14th. It will be in the afternoon, starting at 1 p.m. Alaska time. It goes until 5. Save the date. Information about that is in the handout section on the right-hand side of your screen. This is also a traditional meeting that we've had. I believe it's the 3rd or 4th unity meeting that AKNWRC has had, and it has historically been the day before the opening of the AFN conference. As most of you know, the AFN will also be virtual, and so will our unity meeting. So I encourage folks to register for that and sign up. Again, it will be in the afternoon, and it will be after we've accommodated for the schedule with the youth and elders, which will be finishing up that morning on the 14th. Also, National Congress of American Indian VAWA Task Force will be having, which has periodic meetings. There should be one coming up in October. The date has not been set yet, but please watch our webpage or our Facebook page for notice of that. And there's also an NCAI virtual annual conference. Again, it's this is also going to be virtual, and it's set for November 8th until the 13th. And those are just some events coming up. I saw resources on you can go to the next slide.
Deborah, can I just jump in for a second?
Yes.
So just wanting to share, when Mike was speaking earlier, and Deborah as well, thinking about a specific example of one change that we've seen, and that is since 2006 with the first consultation, Alaska tribes continually provided oral and written testimony about the importance of technical assistance and training designed by and for Alaska Native people. And that was repeatedly provided again through oral and written testimony. And so that was 2006. It took 7 years, but after 7 years of repeated testimony, the Office on Violence Against Women listened, and they released a solicitation that included that purpose area for the development of Alaska Native specific training and technical assistance. And that is sort of how the Alaska Native Women's Resource Center was born, basically. NIWRC applied for that funding in 2013 in partnership with the Alaska advocates that we had been working with for many, many years. We secured the funding, and the Alaska Native Women's Resource Center was born. So that's just one example of the recommendations, the impact that tribal recommendations can make. And then as Deborah was sharing the issue of concern about missing and murdered and the need for data collection, the other resource that came to mind that I haven't really spent a lot of time understanding, but I know we have referenced it, is, and I think Candy posted it in the chat box, and it's the link to the Alaska State's violent death reporting system. And so I haven't spent a lot of time in there, but I think there is data in there that they collect that is specific to violent deaths of Alaska Native people. And I think that is inclusive of anything that that has been labeled as suicide, which I know we talk about the mislabeling of some of these murdered women cases as suicide versus homicide. So that I encourage you all, if you aren't familiar with that system, to take a look at that and use that as part of your testimony. So I'll turn that back over to Deborah. And then Deborah, did you happen to already mention the extension of the Operation Lady Justice testimony, or we're not there yet?
No, I was saving that for the end, but it's a good follow-up to what you just said. For some of you that are on this, and I'm sorry, I can't actually see who's all on here unless you chat something to us or ask a question. But for some of you who were participating or listening in on the Operation Lady Justice, which is a task force out of the White House concerning missing and murdered Indigenous women, we lost the slide, huh? So those consultations, which I use loosely because they weren't following the guidelines that we're used to and have fought hard for consultation, because there was no adequate notice of those, but that's an aside. Anyway, one of the recommendations during those testimony at the Lady Justice was to ask for an extension of written submissions. And the issue is missing and murdered Indigenous women, and that extension was, the written testimony was due today, but we asked for an additional month, and it was just announced yesterday afternoon that the written comments are due now on October 30th. And I love this, at midnight Alaska time, which is, I don't know, 4 o'clock in the morning DC time, but it was one of the things that we asked for, so that we're not scrambling in the middle of the afternoon trying to get our comments in by the deadline. So so that for those of you who are following that was announced yesterday. The additional resources that you have, this page, I encourage you to look through that. Many of these resources we've already mentioned. The Family Violence and Prevention Services Act, which many of you are either recipients of or are familiar with, is also a good resource. They also have periodic consultation, so keep an eye out for that. The Restoration Magazine, of course. And then the last thing on this list is the Safety for Native Women, which is the book that was put out a couple of years ago by the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, is available on through email, the email that's on there, or through Amazon.com. I also want to announce that over the last year and a half, Alaska Native Women's Resource Center has been working on an Alaska-specific companion book to this Safety for National Women, and it is in its final approval and publication stage at this time. Chapters are already written, the text is already finalized, and it's getting ready to be sent to the approvers. In the meantime, while we're waiting for that approval and waiting for the book to actually be published, we will start using specific chapters of that book in upcoming AKNWRC technical assistance sessions that we are engagements that we are doing with specific tribal communities throughout Alaska. So do watch for that book as well. I think we're all pretty excited about that. Okay, now what I want to do is go to the next page, and Paula already mentioned this, and I want to end with this before I say thank you to everybody. But I do want to end with this is an invitation to all the tribes that are on this webinar, plus any ones that you have the ability to reach out for. Both of us are here to assist you with your testimony, to assist you with mapping out your priority issues, and even drafting up a template for you, preparing either your written testimony or your oral testimony. That's one of the things that we're here to help you with. So do give us a call. Our emails are on the page here. And if you need any assistance or just have any questions that you think of after this webinar, please don't hesitate to contact us. I also want to, next page, please. Next slide, please. I want to really thank Paula and Mike both for stepping in. We do miss Tammy, and all of our thoughts and arms are wrapped around her and her family as they are dealing with a loss that all of us feel great sadness about them having to deal with that. We're pitching in to make sure that things continue to move along, which I know is allowing Tammy to spend time with her family. So thank you, Paula, for stepping in and being here to help take on some of the information with me, and for Mike for joining us as well. And with that, I don't think on this webinar platform that we're using today, we have the ability for folks to actually talk. So you are all on mute. So if there are any questions or comments, you to type them into the chat or into the questions. We'll just give you a few minutes if there is anybody. Paula, do you have any last words while we?
I don't. I just want to thank you, Deborah, and thank the Alaska Native Women's Resource Center for doing everything that you are doing to support Alaska tribes, and thank Chief Williams for his leadership, his ongoing, unwavering leadership. You know, Mike, you've been advocating on violence against Alaska Native women issues since, I think, before the National Congress of American Indians had a Violence Against Women task force. So I think the resolutions that you've introduced at NCAI on increasing the safety of Alaska Native and all Native women has just been a testament to your commitment. So I appreciate standing beside you in this work, Mike.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think you know, with the Attorney General's visit last year to Nebraska, I was able to facilitate or help with that trip that he made to that community, and the quick results that came out was pretty impressive. But I think we need to have more support for Alaska tribes and our Alaska women and children and our elders and our communities need to have full protections, and I think we need to that end, you know, safe houses, you know, and all of those need to be because we have, you know, concerns about states failing to our communities. So it's an honor to work on our people's behalf, and with help with the Alaska Native Women's Resource Center and National Indigenous Women's Resource Center. I think and NCAI, of course, are conduit to make sure that national legislation happens, and it's been wonderful to witness what we've been able to do. But it takes a long time, and but we have to be persistent and consistently get our voices out and heard, no matter how. And we have to do it every chance we have. And again, thank you very much for this webinar, and look forward in continued work ahead as much as we can. Thank you.
Good, thank you so much. And it turns out that we have Patty Handy, who's got a hand up, and I've just learned from Candy that we are able to unmute her. So Patty, did you want to ask a question or have something to say?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
It's good to see you guys. It's been a long time.
Yes, good to see you. Good to hear you, Patty.
Yeah. Well, I've been thinking strongly about this. You know, us village people, when we go to Anchorage, Seattle, anywhere in the big city, we don't think about sex trafficking. And you hear about all these women that are missing when they're on their way to college in Anchorage and they haven't been found. So our villages are ignorant about that subject. So we desperately need education in our school system, all of us, even the young women, young men, they need education. So there needs to be some funding or something available for our communities, not only us, but down south, our Native people down south, on sex trafficking, and we need to learn about it. And also the victims. I think about the lack of counseling after our women and our men are violated. There's no counseling. Well, there is, but very little. So there needs to be more availability in our communities and follow up, and also not only the victim, but the children. The children are traumatized, and usually none of them are being helped, so it follows them for the rest of their lives. I'm speaking for I know all this here. So those are the two main issues that I think aren't being addressed and should be. And I thought, well, where can we put it? And I'll just mention it and you'll find a place to put it. Thank you. Good to see you guys.
Good, thank you so much for raising that issue. It's very true. And we will find a place to put that into our priorities.
Well, you know that I'm glad that that Patty brought that up, because when sex trafficking was added by tribes into Title IX in 2013, DOJ was a little slow to roll that out as a new purpose, I guess a new use of the funds. And it really took the tribe saying, we need this information, we need help with developing responses, but we need the information in order to learn how to develop the responses. So it's, you know, Patty, we need to keep bringing it up like you're saying. So that could become a priority issue if, you know, if we keep saying that this is a need. So there's some technical assistance, but I don't know that we probably could do more. We could always do more. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Very good. Any other comments or questions? Any other hands raised? Candy, you could go to the last slide. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. And we've done last remarks. I think it's time to let everybody go. So here's our phone number again. Also our website. Reminder for folks to, if you haven't already, sign up for our mailing list. Go to our website or give us a call. We'll get you added so you don't miss anything. There's lots of events coming up this fall. And then we want to hear from you if you want any assistance on developing your testimony, or if you just have questions as you're working through that process. Give us a call. So with that, I'm gonna wish you all a happy Tuesday or Wednesday, whatever day it is, Wednesday, and a good rest of the week, and be safe and be healthy. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.